This is Marciano. So I just wanted to start off by giving you guys some background information about pit firing and what this demo video is going to show you. So pit firing is done in either, like we've talked about, a charcoal grill or some type of fire pit, or some artists also do it in a metal garbage can. So those are all options as long as it's in a safe, contained environment. At the bottom of the screen, I've given the URL to the article that we've talked about before that goes over pit firing and different ideas and the basic information of what it entails. This video, I'm going to show you guys how to mix grog into earthenware clay, and then how to make pinch pots and what various techniques you can use to make your pinch pots, and then how to dry it out. Like how to dry out your projects is super important, especially since we're not going to be bisque firing our projects before firing them. And then I'm actually going to show you guys how to pit fire. So I'll be videotaping myself setting up the charcoal grill that I have and going through that entire process. Alright, so now it's time to just add some grog to our clay. The clay I'm using is earthenware, and it's our box clay, so it's already pre-mixed clay. It's not completely homogenized because it is starting to show a little bit of drying out with discolorization of the clay on the outside compared to the inside. You're going to see like this lighter area of clay, but we're working with what we got. So in order to mix some of the grog, I'm just going to take a little bit in the palm of my hand. To be honest, I'm not measuring anything out, I'm just kind of winging it. The more grog, the better. It's going to help strengthen the clay, especially because we're using earthenware. So I'm going to go ahead and make a divot in one of the blocks and then add some grog to it. I am working on a surface that's just a countertop. It's just laminate countertop. If you have any fabric at home that you'd want to wedge on, that's fine. But like I said, the clay is already starting to dry out, so you want to make sure not to dry it out anymore. And then again, we're going to make a little sandwich just like we do in the classroom for wedging. And then I'm going to start to wedge. And because the clay is on the drier side, it actually is pretty easy to wedge on the surface. You're going to start to see it marbling a little bit, and you can see some of the grog coming out. Now I wanted to make sure to show you guys exactly what you're going to be doing. So I did not give you guys any type of wire cutter because it's property of the studio, so I could not give you a wire cutter. If you have something at home, a string or a wire, that's fine to cut through, just to kind of mix it up a little bit more, then that's okay. But I'm just going to continue to wedge. And just like we normally wedge, we want to make sure the clay is an even color, so there's no striations or marbling in the clay. It feels plastic all the way through, which it definitely does because this clay is starting to dry out a little bit more, so we don't have to worry about it being so sticky. Okay, we have the conch shell happening. I'm just going to rip it in half, so I can't actually see whether or not I'm wedging well, but you guys are good wedgers now. You don't have to worry about it too much, especially because you're making pinch pots. So once you wedge it all the way through and you start making that pinch pot, you'll see and you'll feel if you have any air pockets, and at that time you can go ahead and just pop them. Okay. You should be able to see some of the grog in the clay itself. If you feel like there's not enough, you can go ahead and add more. But yeah, so I'm going to wedge this as well as one more ball of clay. So I have about 4 pounds total, which is what you guys got in your clay kits. And then we'll go from there. Alright, so now it's time for me to make some pinch pots. So I have the 2 balls of clay that I wedged with grog in it. I'm going to go ahead and rip in half. I'm going to make 4 pinch pots total. So I ripped them in half, hitting it back into a ball. and then doing a thumbs up, thumb straight down, making sure you're holding on to the ball of clay. Once I start to feel pressure on the palm of my hand that I'm holding the ball, I'm gonna go ahead and let go and make sure that the thumb stays inside. Now, the reason why we're making pinch pots is because when you pit fire, it's recommended that you have pieces that are rounded in form. From what I've been told, the reasoning behind that is it allows kind of the flames and everything around it to kind of curl around the pot. It also, the less straight edges you have, the more likely the pot's going to be able to withhold a little bit more of that, that heat. You have to think about, again, when we're pit firing, we're telling the clay, we're going to immerse you in heat, and you're supposed to stay together. There's no exploding, there's no cracking, and asking the clay to do that is, it's hard, and it's not something that the clay is used to. Again, we're going to be pit firing with greenware, so we're not even going to be bisque firing these before we pit fire them, so it's important to make sure that the clay is as ready as possible. So right now I'm creating a pinch pot with a rounded inside and a rounded outside. Pinch pots, what are awesome about them is every person makes a different pinch pot. So I'm making sure that the thickness of my pinch pot is even on all sides, top, bottom, lip. You want to make sure that there's no really thick spot or really thin spot. And in the article that we've been referring to, it says about 3/8 of an inch, I believe. So you want to make sure things aren't too thick. I'm going to be drying these out for about 4 days. I would recommend drying them out for at least a week, especially if you're not bisque firing. But under the time constraint, and I just want to get going on this and make this video so that students can go ahead and try it themselves, we're going to kind of risk it a little bit. And I'll show you a few techniques of what I'm going to do to make sure that the clay is really dried out. So there's my first pinch pot, rounded inside and out. It's kind of enclosed, not really. Next pinch pot I'm going to make is a little bit more open. So again, taking my thumb, pressing it down into the palm, and then starting to do that crab claw all the way around. I'm pressing on more of like the knuckles instead of the fingertips, but for these type of pinch pots, I would encourage you to try different techniques to pinching. So you can try just doing like indents with your fingers to kind of see what happens, because the more texture you have on these, the cooler they could come out. I'm not really sure. So don't be afraid to experiment in any way. Like I said, I'm going to try to make this wider. So instead of having my hand straight up and down, I'm actually going to angle it out. And you can use the other fingers instead of using that thumb to kind of make this pinch pot go wider. Like that. You can also take like the lip and manipulate it in some way as well, so it doesn't have to be a straight lip in any way. It can be flared or pinched or curled. Again, I want you guys to be as experimentative as possible throughout this process, because the entire process is an experiment. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So we're going to go ahead and just give it a try. Making sure that the walls are nice and even on all sides. We don't have a thick area, so I'm double checking, pressing with my thumb and finger to kind of feel the thickness of the clay. Using the tabletop to make sure I have a nice flat base. And there's my more open pinch pot. All right, 2 more. So there is one tool that I got from the studio, and it's called a hole cutter. So it's a loop that has kind of like a edge to it that cuts through the clay and it creates a hole cutter. Easy enough. So I thought it'd be kind of cool maybe if I cut some holes towards the top of one of these, and then after it's been pit fired, I could wrap wire or yarn or some type of material through the holes to create a little bit more of like a decorative technique. So I'm gonna go ahead and choose, think of this guy. Now, if you don't have a hole cutter at home, which you probably don't, which is okay, you can use drill bits or pretty much anything to poke a hole through, and then kind of smooth out that hole after, or just leave it super ragged and rough. Pit firing is kind of a organic, rough, go with the flow type of firing, so if you want it to kind of embody that idea, then that's totally fine. So I'm going to go ahead and just kind of cut some holes. Dry out our projects, it's really important to remember that we want to get all the moisture out of the clay, not as quickly as possible, but we want to give it enough time to actually evaporate. So in the studio before, I've had you guys drape your projects, which slowly dries them out. The reason why we did that was because you scratched, slipped, and attached pieces onto other pieces, and in order to make sure nothing popped off, we want to slowly dry the project. In this case, since we made pinch pots and there's nothing attached to them, you can dry them pretty quick. So my first step is, after I made the pinch pots, I actually put them outside in the sun on a stone surface to try to dry them out. Heat does help. Do not put them in an oven or anything, but outside in the sun is a great option. If it's super dreary and rainy out, try to maybe put it in a room that gets some heat, or you just don't want to keep it in a really wet, damp environment. You want to try to dry out these projects the best that you can. How do you know if your project's totally dry? Well, the project cannot be cold in any way. Cold to the touch. If it's cold to the touch, it means that there's still moisture in it. It needs to be actually room temperature, and it should be bone dry. So it should look whitish gray in color, and again, doesn't feel cold at all. There's other ways to figure out or to make sure your projects are dry. You can actually put them on newspaper, or kind of sit them on fabric so that fabric also absorbs any moisture. A lot of potters also sit their projects on pieces of wood, because again, as you guys have learned, wood can dry out projects as well. So sitting them on surfaces that absorb moisture totally works. And then also just making sure to have them sit out for about a week.